and welcome to the first hearing of the Interior Environment Appropriations Subcommittee on the fiscal year 2025 President's Budget. Chief Moore, thank you for being here to present the President's budget and discuss a variety of topics important to our states and important to the nation. As you and as members of this committee know, I continue to beat the drum about the dangers of climate chaos. This past year we had the hottest day, hottest month, hottest year in human history. And we see the consequences all around us. In my home state of Oregon, the average snowpack in the Cascades has dropped 20 feet in the last 90 years. A lot less snow melt that contributes to the quality of our streams, a lot less snow melt that contributes to the water for our farmers and ranchers. As droughts have deepened and temperatures have soared, our wildfire season is getting longer and more extreme. And then we have the threats of insects and disease, making a bad situation worse. So we need to do all we can to help make our forests more resilient. Over the last 4 years, since you became chief and I became chair of this committee, Congress has invested significantly in the Forest Service. A major focus of these investments has been on restoring forest health and reducing the conditions of catastrophic wildfires. Administration's Wildfire Crisis Strategy Implementation Plan details how we need to build landscape resiliency and cultivate healthy conditions. And the annual funding provided by this Appropriations Subcommittee, supplemented by investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, is making a difference. But forest improvements do not stop when a particular project is finished. We're touching only a small percent of the total number of acres that need to be addressed. And of course, the projects we've completed, the forests continue to grow on that land. I know that you and I share the goal of ensuring our forests are healthy and resilient in the face of climate chaos. We've put some of the best practices to work to clear undergrowth, to thin stand density, to use prescribed burns to reduce individual wildfire events, and I've really seen how the attitude towards prescribed burns has changed in our state, where folks used to resist smoke on a single day. They now would much rather have smoke on a single day or a few days rather than see the threat of their town burning to the ground, as happened in 6 communities in the Labor Day fires of 2020. I know my colleague from New Mexico is here. We also have to make sure prescribed burns stay on the prescribed landscape. And we should learn from the tribal knowledge and incorporate indigenous practices into our maintenance and conservation efforts. But forests in the United States, they are way behind the benchmarks of where they need to be to withstand significant fire activity. As we celebrate the investments of the last few years, there's still a number of concerns regarding the ability of the Forest Service to sustain this work and set the stage for long-term resiliency. The additional resources provided in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, those are one-time investments, and those funds are running out. The Legacy Restoration Fund, from which this subcommittee allocates $285 million each year to the Forest Service for deferred maintenance, expires next year. Over the last 5 years, these funds have been used to repair roads and bridges on our public lands, to provide needed access and assist fire response, to renovate employee housing in remote areas for seasonal staff and firefighters, and to build and repair other facilities related to recreation in our national forests. And then we have accelerating climate chaos. The world is not standing still in this regard, and we need to continue the Wildfire Suppression Reserve Fund, which expires in fiscal year 2027. That's quite a few significant headwinds that we are facing. Turning to the FY25 President's budget for the Forest Service, I'd note that the budget does not contain brand new policy initiatives. That's not a criticism. It's a recognition of the budget circumstances which we are operating. But the budget does make an important statement that the Forest Service continues to prioritize its workforce. And that's important because that workforce is the way that we get the projects accomplished. We depend on our team members to deliver for the people and to deliver for the land. I want the Forest Service to have the resources it needs to confront the challenges of building forest resiliency in the face of climate chaos. I thank you for your dedication to the people and to the mission of the Forest Service. And I'm delighted that on this subcommittee, I have a partner from Alaska who understands these issues from the perspective of growing challenges for the forests of her home state. It's been a pleasure to work with her, and I'll turn the microphone over to her.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, it's tough to figure out our calendar anymore. Having just completed FY24, we're now racing into FY25, and it is the 9th or 10th of April. Anyway, we are where we are. Chief Moore, welcome to the committee. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the President's budget and the role that the Forest Service plays in my state, but in the states across the country here. So before we get into the President's budget request, though, I want to talk a little bit about Christmas. If you want to talk about a confused calendar, because we're excited for Christmas. We're excited for the holiday season in Alaska because, once again, Alaska has been asked to host the Capitol Christmas tree that will grace the West Lawn. We were able to do this in 2015. Had a magnificent tree that came from the Chugach. I think we have all had an opportunity to host the tree, but logistics are just a little more complicated coming out of Alaska. But we managed to do it beautifully, so well that we were asked again. And this year, the tree will not come from the Chugach National Forest. It will come from our other great national forest, the Tongass National Forest, a part of the state that I grew up in, and is an amazing region, rich with resources and native cultural histories. So, Chief, I want to thank you and your staff for the work that you have already done in anticipation of this, working with our team as we identify an extraordinary creation that will be here on the Capitol lawn in some months. It is hard, though. It is hard, and sometimes I feel it's more than just a little bit ironic that we're going to be able to harvest an extraordinary tree from the Tongass, but we can't seem to throw a lifeline to the timber industry in the region. This administration, and you and I have talked about this many, many times before, and the committee has heard it also, but this administration abandoned the Alaska-specific roadless rule in favor of reinstating the 2001 national roadless rule on the Tongass. Despite all the data and the analysis that supported the Alaska-specific rule, the administration has really made it near impossible to have a sustainable regional timber economy. It was Secretary Vilsack who promised me not only once, not only twice, but multiple times, and to my colleagues from this state, we were going to see a transition from old growth harvesting to harvesting young growth that would allow the Tongass to retain a small but a viable timber industry, and that transition simply has not materialized. It is more than just another broken promise to the residents of Southeast. Years of work in collaboration with the agency, environmental groups, and tribes to invest in the promised transition has resulted in an all but dead timber program in the Tongass. And I certainly have conveyed my frustration. You have heard it, but it is frustrating that the administration doesn't seem to agree that the Southeast part of the state can have both a healthy forest and a sustainable timber industry. I think the administration can and should do more to provide opportunity for the people there of Southeast Alaska. Talking about wildfires, we have significant wildfires in the state of Alaska. Oftentimes, it's eye-popping, the numbers of acres, hundreds of thousands, millions of acres. But they're usually in parts of the state where we have not much intersect with human population or property. We're seeing that change, though, in the state, and we've had a conversation again to speak about what is happening as we're seeing warmer temperatures the beetle kill that is moving up and around the state, the management decisions that are impacting our fire risk. This is significant in so many of our communities now. So we pay close attention, as my colleagues in the West do. I'm looking forward to you sharing the wildfire outlook for us. Again, we're dealing with issues of drought, of mortality, and it just seems to build on that enhanced fire risk. I'm hoping that you're going to address how the Forest Service is using the major infusion of funding that we've seen in recent years aimed at wildfire risk reduction to invest in combating the threats to our collective states. I do want to note that the continuation of the proposal to modernize and reform wildland fire workforce pay is very welcome. As you know, in a tight budget environment in FY24, we made it a point to invest heavily in our wildland firefighters. We ensured that they do not see a reduction in pay that is due to them in FY24. But we all know that they're looking for a permanent fix, and I know the authorizing committees have been working on this. So I'm looking forward to continuing to do what we can on the appropriations side to take care of our frontline firefighters as they engage in this very dangerous line of work. As I'm sure all my colleagues who interact with the Forest Service can tell you, there's so many needs in our states beyond wildfire, but oftentimes it's that one issue that literally sucks the oxygen out of the room. So we don't want to lose focus on what we do to support our robust recreation industry, provide capacity to support critical mineral mining projects, broadband access, and of course, a timber supply for our withering timber industry. One important way we can enhance capacity is to empower tribes to be partners with the federal government, and again, that's something that I look forward to extending conversation on. I do want to stress that what we need in our forests is not just capacity for its own sake, but rather the right capacity, the right workers with the right skills to meet the needs of our forests and our communities. So I'm looking forward to hearing your vision of how the President's fiscal year 25 budget request will do just that. Know that you have a committee here that wants to try to work with you to do good things across our country. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and look forward to the testimony this morning.
Chief Moore, we look forward to your testimony.
So, Chair Merkley, Ranking Member Murkowski, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me today to testify, and we're grateful for your continued support. The President's budget names three primary goals for us. It's to modernize wildland fire management, sustain investments critical to mission, and ensure equitable access and benefits to America. Today, I will share our progress as we put money to work to confront serious challenges. I'll share how our work will continue to be a sound investment. We directly steward approximately 193 million acres of National Forest System lands. We reach across boundaries to assist states, tribes, communities, and private landowners to keep millions more acres of forests healthy and productive. Every American benefits from these forests, directly or indirectly. Together, these lands provide basic needs for life, clean air, and water, while they contribute to energy production and support local economies. National forests alone contribute more than 410,000 jobs and $44.3 billion to the GDP. To sustain productivity and health, forests must be able to withstand these threats that are posed by wildfire, climate change, drought, disease, and insects. We invested resources to act and ensure that they do just that. Foremost, we provide work to reduce wildfire risk, safeguard communities, and create resilient, healthy forests. In calendar year 2022, we launched the 10-year wildfire crisis strategy, and we have since moved to implement it. Annual appropriations coupled with the historic bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act provided an extraordinary opportunity to take bold and strategic actions. We did just that. We progressed to deliver on a promise to increase pace and scale of our treatments. We're not just treating any acres, we're treating the right acres in the right places at the right scale. We focused initial efforts on 21 priority landscapes within western fire sheds that are at highest risk. They account for roughly 80% of wildfire risk. These investments are paying dividends. Experts roughly reported that $700 billion worth of housing and infrastructure are at risk within priority landscapes. This includes about $6.5 billion of municipal watersheds, which supply drinking water to 12 million Americans. In the last 2 years, we reduced the average wildfire risk to these assets by 8% for infrastructure, 8% for housing, and 12% for watersheds. That means we protected more than $175 million worth of homes that are at risk. In the Stanislaus National Forest, for example, 17 communities are at lower risk, including the towns of Cold Springs and Strawberry. 1 million socially vulnerable people are at less risk. Nearly half of National Forest lands in priority landscapes are now considered unlikely to burn at high intensity. We must remain on course and build on these gains that we have seen and that we are seeing. We must also invest in our firefighters. We recognize the urgency of investing in a permanent and comprehensive pay increase to provide a more livable wage, enhance recruitment, and stabilize retention. We must also improve housing conditions and provide better care for firefighters' physical and mental needs and health. We look forward to seeing an end to reports of firefighters living in cars with few benefits and limited mental health care. In addition to work to address the wildfire crisis and firefighters, we continue to take actions that support access and benefits from forests. Visitor use, hunting and fishing, energy and minerals development, forest products, and livestock grazing generate 69% of the contributions to the economy. Thanks to the Great American Outdoor Act funds, we relieved some of the pressures from the $8.6 billion maintenance backlog. The budget requested $58 million to maintain critical recreation services with a focus on offering welcoming and equitable opportunities. We're also making a difference in our urban environments. The Forest Service and partners are planting and maintaining trees in cities and suburbs where about 84% of Americans live. Trees combat extreme heat and climate change and improve access to nature. The 2025 budget returns basic funding to most programs. This includes forest products, which are vital to sustaining rural economies. This includes sustainable timber supply. We know it's a critical component and is part of a complex market-driven system. And while we don't control markets, we can support industry through forest products and wood innovations, which help mills adapt and modernize. So in closing, we're fully committed to meeting the challenges before us with resources that Congress provides. The people of America deserve nothing less than to see their money put to work to benefit all. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Moore. And the first question I wanted to put forward is related to mass timber. In the FY24 bill, we have the comment that the committee believes the service should be an exemplar in using mass timber building materials and require the use of mass timber in the construction, renovation, or repair of its facilities. The mass timber movement has really increased the ability to build buildings of multiple stories with timber rather than with concrete and steel. And so we're sequestering carbon rather than spending a lot more energy because concrete and steel are very energy intensive. Also, the buildings are very beautiful. They're more earthquake resistant, and they can be put up a lot faster. So with all those advantages, we'd really like to see the Forest Service lead the way in using these materials. In some parts of the country, the building codes haven't changed and have created an obstacle. We've certainly changed them in Oregon and a number of other states, but those building codes don't apply on federal land. Can you help lead the Forest Service into being kind of a driver of the mass timber movement, given all those advantages?
Thank you for the opportunity, Senator, to respond to that question. And the short answer, of course, is yes. We feel that we are also making huge contributions toward this area. In fact, my staff has informed me that looking at where we currently are, and for this year, there's well over 2,000 buildings that have been built, designed, or being designed using cross-laminated timber. I would have you know that our Forest Products Laboratory out of Madison, Wisconsin, has been really one of the leading researchers on using this kind of technology. And we've been working with other companies like Woodwork and others to help push this issue of mass timber or cross-laminated timber, those types of new technologies. So we feel pretty good that we are responding. We have a lot of great partnerships. To give you an example of one of these successes that we would like for you to consider, if you don't already know, we have actually the tallest building in the world right now using cross-laminated timber. That's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it's 26 stories high. And we think that this type of technology is going to continue to refine itself. Now, one of the challenges we have, and our researchers are working on this, is being able to use low-value, small-diameter material to use in these products. And so that science is being perfected now, but it's not where it needs to be the same, and particularly in terms of the large commercial-graded timber and lumber.
Okay, well, I'm very glad to hear that. I'm going to follow up to get more of a comprehensive report from your team on the uses in Forest Service buildings and the planned uses. And one of the advantages is that you can use small diameter. In fact, there's no reason not to use small diameter. So it works very well with second growth forests and repeated harvesting on a multi-decade cycle. Shifting gears, we have seen a number of sawmills close or prepare to close in Oregon this last year. I have a list of 5 of them. And the supply of timber is often cited as a significant factor. And one of the, there's multiple things that are going into this. One of this is from some of our fires, we had big surges in salvage logging, which then may be wrapped up. We also have private timber companies that are shipping a lot of logs to China and to Japan. But as the Forest Service, in its role, there's a partnership with the sawmills. Kind of analyze the flow of logs and can help us gain insight on these various dynamics as we try to preserve these local sawmills. Once you have to carry the logs a longer distance, that's a big problem. And of course, one of the reasons that I've been really supportive of forest management is that one, makes our forests more resilient to fires, but it also supplies a steady supply of saw logs to the local mills and other cellulose. One mill owner said it's like we're weeding the woods, and he's producing like 3 or 4 different products from small scraps of wood, including pellets that are shipped over to Asia to burn. Anyway, the core question here is, does the Forest Service kind of track and analyze the flow of wood with these various influences as it tries to ensure this partnership with local sawmills is sustained and the sawmills stay open?
Yes, Senator Bill and Ira, by the way, have really allowed us to increase the number of large-scale contracts and agreements that we feel will provide increased availability of wood and wood products for the long term. Now, while timber supply and some of the changes in the types of wood that's available now has created some concerns, there's other factors that are in play. The forest product industry, for example, and the associated milling infrastructure, they're facing a set of what I would consider to be really complex challenges. The example that I would use is, over the last 20 years, the pulp industry has experienced a significant decrease in demand for paper products while moving toward a much higher proportion of recycled feedstock. And when you look at some of the shifts and changes that are taking place, I think our role, and we've been working with a lot of our partners, is to really create opportunities through wood innovations. Because when you look at national forests, and when you look at the majority of products that come off national forests, it is, by and large, small diameter, low value material. Now, that material still has a use. And so how do we transition, or help the country transition from not only just commercial saw logs, but also being able to use this material for things like what you've mentioned, cross-laminated timber, nanocellulose material that strengthens products. How do we look at, other concerns like biochar, biofuel, and some of these types of things that are taking place across the country? And then there's market-driven conditions that are taking place across the country. You know, if you look at the price of lumber right now, it's pretty low. When you look at what the Forest Service is doing, in many of our locations, we have wood that we have sold that has not been cut. And I think market conditions are driving a lot of those types of things. And so the timber industry right now have a lot of concerns, a lot of complex issues, and they're legitimate. But I can tell you with certainty that if we do not have a vibrant timber industry, we're not going to be able to manage our forests and make them healthy and resilient. So it's in all of our best interests to work together as partners.
Thank you very much, Chief. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for those questions, and thank you, Chief, for the very final comment that you said right there. You said that if we don't have viable timber harvest in our national forests, this whole thing it doesn't work, right? If we're going to manage them properly, and I've listened carefully to your statement that you have provided here at the table, and I think I only heard you mention the word timber a couple times. You said specifically forest products includes a sustainable timber supply. We get that. But in your written testimony, you mentioned the word timber twice, and maybe I'm just a little too focused on the words this morning, but we can't get to forest products, we can't get to the management unless we acknowledge and accept that these trees, this renewable resource that is on these great public lands, that there is a use for them, a very important use for us. But also, if we fail to manage them, there are consequences, and we see those consequences play out more and more as we're seeing the catastrophic loss to property, to human life, when we see these major fires coming through so many parts of the country. And so I want to just ask a little more specifically in terms of what role you see the timber program playing in the Forest Service for the long term here, because the fear that I have, you've got this old growth conservation plan. You have the comments that Senator Merkley has made, bless you, about your small sawmills. What you're going to have is you're going to have the industry, the folks that have been kind of hanging on by their fingernails, who do not see enough timber coming to them. So they close their shops. And we can talk about thinning, we can talk about forest products, but if we don't have a viable industry out there, then you don't expect the federal government to be in the sawmill business necessarily. So how do we marry this all up? Because I'm concerned that Forest Service has gone from the mission and the focus of multiple use, including timber harvest, that can help these communities. And you spend a lot of time in your written testimony talking about the ensuring equitable access and benefits to the national forest system. And I've got all of my communities that sit in the Tongass, whether it's Ketchikan or Craig, going all the way up to Yakutat. Those communities are suffering economically because we're not seeing any harvest. And I'm not talking big stuff now, and you and I know that because we've ratcheted back so far under the policies not only of this administration, but of other administrations as well, to the point where there is nothing there. So how do we balance all that? That's a rambling question to a very important, a rambling setup for what I hope you will share with me as to what role you see the timber program playing in Forest Service policy going forward.
So thank you, Senator Murkowski, and I understand what you're saying. You know, it's a question that I think all of us have to sit down and talk about, and it goes back into the history. And I'll just go back as far back as 1986 to 89, where timber that was provided off national forests was represented about 17% of all the timber that was managed across this country. Today, it's somewhere around 3 to 4%. And when you look at the conditions on the landscape that have changed over time, and you look at the largest land use shift that we have in this country, which is wildland-urban interface areas, you have a lot of communities that have built homes and communities into the wildland interface. And so now there's a basic question that I think we're trying to respond to, is that should we be moving to protect communities from wildfire? And I think the answer is yes. But when you look at the wildfire crisis strategy and what it's trying to focus on, it's doing that. Now, the type of material that you have generally is small diameter kinds of things. And so when you remove that, it's not as much biomass, or it's not as much material in the smaller trees than what we've historically had and were cutting back in the 80s and before. And so what I think we have a duty to do, and I say we, I'm talking about us, but I'm also talking about industry, and I'm talking about all the communities we serve, is how do we transition the industry to take more of the type of material that we have in abundance. And that's why under the bill in IRA, we have been investing quite a bit in wood innovation so we can help transition more towards some of the type of material that we have in abundance. And I keep going to the small diameter, low value kinds of material, but we're creating products out of it through our scientists and working with other partners and universities. And I talked about the nanocellulose material. You know, for example.
Can I, but before you get into the technology, because I get where you're going there, and I understand that we need this technology to address some of the lower value, younger growth, but you still have significant forests around this country, national forests around this country,
right,
that are not that lower value, but that are dead or dying because they're old, because they have been subjected to disease, and are presenting a threat to this wildfire. Now, I'm not suggesting that the answer is just to go out there and clear cut it, but what you've just said to me is that Forest Service role here is more from a timber management role to one where it's designed to protect from wildfire, which if that's really what you think Forest Service role or mission is, I think that's a different approach.
Yeah, no, that's not it. But it is a basic question that I think need answering, because you only have so much capacity to go in either one of those directions, or you're just balancing both needs.
Yeah, why does it have to be an either or? I think you've got a compatibility. You have the ability to be able to harvest sustainably, while at the same time protecting your communities from threat. I don't think it should be viewed as an either or. And if that's the way we're structuring things, I think that's a risk to us.
Yeah, of course it is. And it's different all across the country. And so what you may be seeing in Alaska is different than what I see in Utah.
Sure.
And so how do you balance all of those differences, the diversity across the country? And when I look at, I'll give you an example of dead and dying trees, and how when we have been working with the logger to market that type of material, the kind of creativity that's coming out. So there on the Mantalo South National Forest, as an example, a lot of dead and dying trees, which most of your lumber companies, timber companies, don't have a use for that. But they started working with this one logger to look at how do you market this dead and dying material. And they've created a market. Just to give you an example, before, it didn't have much of a timber sale program. Now, timber sales is in excess of 300 million board feet on that small forest. It's because they've created a use for small diameter, low value type material and dead and dying trees that we didn't have before. And so I think the solution is really to engage the community in finding uses for the type of material that we have geographically across the country. I think that's where we can be successful. So what I would do in Alaska may be different than what I would do in Utah, or vice versa. And that's what we're trying to do, is how do we engage the community into helping us make some of these decisions where we have been traditionally making those decisions, because I think the best solution is working with the communities and our partners.
Well, I want to defer to my colleagues because I have exceeded my time, but I would certainly urge you to engage with the Southeast Alaska communities who, again, see a great resource, a renewable resource, and want the ability to not only provide that value, but also see the economic value to their region. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll come back for second rounds and thirds.
Thank you very much, Senator Heinrich.
Chief, I want to follow up on Ranking Member Murkowski's question. What on in that individual case of the Monte LaSalle, what is the use case for the low-value dead and dying timber that they're taking off the forest?
So in one case, they worked out a contract with this oil company, where you sell firewood at some of these gas stations.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the opportunities there. They've also looked at turkey bedding, those types of opportunities. So there's a lot of different uses for the type of wood, and that's where we've been the most successful is when we have worked with the local community to market the type of material that's in that local community.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, given the geographic diversity of our forests and the fact that we all have this issue of the biggest challenge is the economics of trying to take small diameter wood out of the forest that we don't have the money to extract. And so I think the more focus you can put on that in many of our states, the more we'll see the forest condition improve as a result. You and I met last September with Director Chuck Sams from the National Park Service to talk about how to prevent cattle from grazing allotments on the Santa Fe National Forest from trespassing onto the Valles Caldera National Preserve and damaging the sensitive trout streams across the northern portion of that preserve. That's been an ongoing problem. It's something I get complaints about all season long. What progress has been made on that problem since our meeting 6 months ago?
So, Senator, Director Sams and I have, with the National Park Service, have talked about this, and we've talked through the issue, and we basically have committed to working together. So the question was, well, what's the result of that? Mm-hmm. And so far, the results have been the same because we can't seem to get beyond where we are. One of the challenges we have and the problems we're having is where that fence is located around forested areas. Every winter, trees fall and just break the fence down. I do think that if we could pursue a hardier type fence, that would be more of a solution, but neither of us have the funding to provide the type of fence, say like a pole fence or something like that, that would provide a lot of stability and it would harden that fence line.
Well, it's good that you're in front of the Appropriations Committee then. I will be more than happy to work with you on a pipe and cable fence that can survive the winters out there. But what I would ask of the Forest Service is for the Forest Service and the Park Service together,
Yes,
to take responsibility for the maintenance of that infrastructure and of any of the infrastructure we build to maintain that separation between the park and the forest.
okay.
Is that something you're willing to commit to?
Yeah, of course I am.
Okay, thank you. That's progress. FEMA recently awarded a $1.9 million grant to the state of New Mexico for watershed planning in the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon burn area. I want to ask if the Forest Service will participate in that planning process, because we need to make sure that so that the watershed plan can incorporate the flood risks for local communities from the damaged watersheds on the national forest.
Senator, yes, we would participate in that.
I appreciate that very much. We talked a little bit earlier about the backlog of infrastructure that you're seeking to address through the Great American Outdoors Act. Can you elaborate a little more on the progress that you've made utilizing Great American Outdoors Act funds to reinvest in Forest Service infrastructure? Because I know earlier that was a struggle for the Forest Service. And so if you're doing better, I would love to know specifically where are you making progress, and are we going to get to where you're utilizing the full funds that we authorized?
Yeah, so Senator, we are making some progress. The challenge that we're really having, though, is that deferred maintenance is such a huge backlog that it's hard to make a dent in the amount of money that we've gotten through GAOA. But now, if we had not gotten the dollars through that, we would not have been able to do this. And I'll give you an example. We have $8.6 billion worth of deferred maintenance. Every year, we have more going into that, and we've estimated that it would take about $1 billion a year to handle all of the deferred maintenance that we have. Now, we have been allocating roughly $285 million or so from GAO monies to get at that backlog, and that has been very helpful. So thank you for your support and for this committee's support in providing those funds. But $8.6 billion is a lot to try and get a handle on without a lot of additional resources. But we are doing it. We took our time with GAO monies, and we've had a lot of public meetings so that we could invite the public into helping us to decide how we would develop criteria to address this issue. And so where we focused on was high public use areas. And we have a lot of support in the different communities because our criteria was based on those high public touch areas. And so that's been our focus.
I think that's been a good focus. You know, we've seen that any closed infrastructure on national forests is an economic limiter to these rural communities. So if you have a campground that's closed, if you have recreational facilities that are closed, that has a direct impact on the gateway communities. And so I very much support that focus. Last question, because I'm running out of time here. I know you've requested funding for 570 new full-time firefighters, but we also recognize that we are not adequately compensating firefighters, even with the changes that have been made. We need to do more. Do you believe that you'll actually be able to find 570 new hires under the current conditions?
I believe so. We're certainly moving into the hiring season with every intentions of reaching that goal. You know, the challenge for us as it relates to firefighters, there's a couple of things. One, that the trust is low, that the pay bump will be permanent. And so there's a lot of hesitancy within the agency. What we're also finding, though, is that when you have an employee who's worked 15 to 20 years, and when that person leaves, we've lost about anywhere between $1 and $2 million investment in that person to get them up to speed where they are. And so when you lose that kind of investment, it's just a continuous cycle of bringing new people in, trying to get their proficiencies levels up to where that 15 to 20-year employee was at. So it's a real challenge for us, and that's what we're facing now.
I think that really raises for us, Chairman, the challenge we have, which is we need to make these changes permanent. We need to address the housing challenges, the mental health challenges, and send the signals to these wildland firefighters that we value them and that that's going to be more than talk. It's going to be real resources.
Thank you. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chief Moore, really glad to have this opportunity to hear about what you need for the Forest Service, really important work. Like so many visitors each year, I love the beauty of our national forests in Washington State. We have the Olympic, the Okanagan, Wenatchee, Gifford-Pinchot, Colville, and they're all amazing. They really are a national treasure, but they're also home to keystone species, including salmon, which are so important to my state. They are a resource in so many ways to our tribes and to our communities, and they're part of our history. One of the first big businesses in Seattle was actually selling lumber to build cities across the West Coast. So I really believe that we have a responsibility to not just manage our forest resources, but to maintain these for generations to come. And that means investing in our forests. Because if we shortchange them, there's not enough money in the world to restore forests if we fail to protect them now. I really don't want future generations hearing about the forests that we once had, or the trees that once stood really tall, or the salmon that once swam in our rivers. I want to make sure we pass those riches on to our kids and grandkids intact. And that means making sure that our Forest Service has the funding it needs to help preserve the public land in its care, to work with our communities to be good stewards of our natural resources, and prevent and respond to threats like wildfire. And when it comes to wildfires, I'm especially focused on making sure that we extend the fire fix and address the underfunding challenges that we've had for that work. So first of all, thank you for your recent investments in Central Washington Initiative, which is delivering IRA wildfire risk reduction funding to the Okanagan Wenatchee National Forest. That forest has hundreds of thousands of acres that need forest restoration and wildfire risk reduction work. It contains communities with some of the highest wildfire risks in the nation. And I have heard from my constituents there that they're concerned about staff turnover, especially among senior leaders in Washington State, which will really inhibit projects like the Central Washington Initiative. What are you doing to stabilize staffing, especially among senior leaders, and reduce that turnover?
Thank you, Senator Murray. And I had a chance to visit that area that you mentioned earlier last summer, and I would agree with you. It's a beautiful area, but it's at risk. And we've been doing a lot of work in there trying to protect that community from fires that could go through that any day. And so we've made that one of the high priority areas, and we began to see a lot of results working with partners in that community with the collaborative and whatnot. So in terms of employees moving, those are personal decisions that they make, to look at advancing. And so one way that we've tried to respond directly to that issue is not necessarily require or put a high value on people moving all across the country. That still provides a value, but not the same as perhaps what we used to do in the past. The pandemic has changed a lot of how we look at employees and how we look at keeping them in an area. And so we're making adjustments now based on what we have seen living through the pandemic in terms of employees wanting to leave or not wanting to leave. And what you'll see is that we've tried to be as flexible as we can to allow the individual employees the flexibility that they need or desire. What we decided to do when I first became chief of this agency, and this is a conversation I had with the secretary, is that we needed to, if we're going to implement Bill and IRA, we really need to hire additional employees. And when I looked at the agency and what had happened over the last 15 years, we lost 38% of the non-fire workforce. And that equaled to about 8,000 people. And so what we wanted to do was hire half of that back and then leverage the other half working with communities and partners to do the work. And that did a couple of things for us. One, it brought the community to the table to help make decisions so that we could make decisions collaboratively about certain geographic areas. Now, we've done that. And what we've also had to do was look at the different skill sets that we need to bring into the agency to meet the needs of the future. You look at the trends that are developing across this country, whether it's climate change, whether it's those types of things, carbon sequestration and those types of issues, we needed to add capacity to the workforce to deal with those issues. And so we've been doing that, and we added additional people, non-fire positions as well as fire positions to the workforce. Now, with the budget situation as it is, we're having to take another look to see where and how we make adjustments in some of those decisions. But it gave us a chance to pivot, to prepare the organization for the future and how it's managing issues and concerns.
Okay, well, we are concerned there because we're seeing staff will return at the top, and you start working with the communities and you don't have that continuation. It really makes it challenging.
Senator Murray, I will tell you this. What I am hopeful about is that we have excellent employees that can move up. Now, it doesn't get directly at your question, but I want to give you some assurances that we have excellent employees in the pipeline, and what they need are opportunities now. And this is providing opportunities to get local people to move into these positions at a much greater rate than what they have in the past. And so that's the plus side of this.
Okay. Can you just talk really quickly about the impact of the fire fix, how it's impacted your operations, and what a lapse in that would mean?
Well, if I understand the question right, getting a fire fix really means stop the bleeding from our firefighters, because we had been losing them at an alarming rate, particularly the experienced firefighters. We had also been getting some declinations over the last couple of years because of the pay and the fact that you could work at a fast food restaurant and make more than a lot of our firefighters on the lower end of the pay scale was making. This pay bump that Congress has provided has been the difference in keeping people in place longer. But I'll tell you, they're real they're concerned that this may not be permanent. And so they are looking at their options on whether they can provide for their families by taking another job, or whether they should stay here and trust that Congress is going to provide the stability that they're looking for, because they love the work they do. They love working for the agency.
Yeah.
It's just that they have families to care for.
Okay, and I'm out of time, but I did want to ask you quickly about the Mount St. Helens Johnston Ridge Observatory. There was a massive landslide there last May, and that observatory means a lot to people who visit the region and to families in my state. I know there's ongoing long-term planning to restore that. It's going to take several years, and I just wanted to find out from you what the intermediate access for recreational opportunities is going to be.
I don't know that, but I can find that out with you, Senator, and get back with you.
Would you? I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Senator Murray. And I was just in the town of St. Helens, which happens to be on the Oregon side of the border because it has such a spectacular view of the mountain. Let's turn to Senator Sinema.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley and Ranking Member Murkowski, and thank you to Chief Moore for being here today. It's good to see you again, Chief Moore, and I hope to get you out to Northern Arizona again quite soon. I'm looking forward to discussing critical forest restoration and firefighting needs with you today. My first question for you is, thanks to the increased funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA and hard work from local Forest Service staff, the Forest Restoration Initiative, known as FORFRI, is beginning to make real progress in reducing wildfire threats across northern Arizona. Partners like Coconino County, the City of Flagstaff, SRP, the Nature Conservancy, the National Forest Foundation, Arizona Department of Forest and Fire Management, and many others have invested over $40 million in partnerships with the USFS to get FORFRI where it is today. In addition, private industry like Restoration Forest Product Groups has invested over $250 million in infrastructure in the past 2 years to meet this challenge. So now is not the time to cut funding from this important wildfire crisis landscape. So how does the Forest Service plan to support this effort over the next 5 years as forest restoration implementation increases on this landscape?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your support, Senator, over the years. So we really appreciate it. One of the concerns that I would agree with you on is that FORFRI, for a lot of different reasons, has not been as successful as what we need it to be. And so what we've decided to do was to take a step back, engage with people in the communities, and try and bring them to the table on how we're going to move forward with FORFRI. Now, I was just down there meeting with the region about a month or so ago to get a briefing on where we were going with FORFRI. And I've also assigned a person out of my office here in D.C. to work with them. And we've got a couple of things going on there. We have the need to work with tribes. We have the need to work with the small operators, and we have the need to work with the large operators. And so what we are doing is moving to a larger scale type of a program, a project that will allow the larger companies to have the products that they need to stay in operations, but also the smaller operators who have traditionally used those lands for those purposes as well. We feel like we have a really good path forward, looking at some of the stewardship contracts and just some of the agreements that we are working with the different folks in the community. And I'm hopeful that we'll be successful. We seem to be having success currently.
Another committee I sit on, the Homeland Security Committee, recently held a hearing regarding the wildfire crisis, and I want to ask you the same question I asked a witness from the GAO. They've examined the impact of low pay on recruitment and retention of qualified wildland firefighters. I was proud to secure the temporary pay increase in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and we introduced a permanent pay fix for wildland firefighters, the Wildland Firefighter Paycheck Protection Act. Now, this legislation passed out of our committee last year with broad bipartisan support. It's urgent that the Senate consider this legislation quickly. But in your experience, how has the temporary increase in pay impacted the ability of fire services to recruit qualified candidates? And how has the promise of Congress working towards a permanent solution impacted workforce morale? And finally, what would be the impact to our federal wildland firefighting workforce if these much-deserved pay increases were to go away?
So let me start with the current status of them, whether it's through a CR or whatnot. The downside, the good side is that they're continuing to make the money. The downside is that it doesn't count toward retirement. And so until it's permanent, the pay bump is not going to count toward their retirement. So when you look at a firefighter that's up toward the end of their career, that have 20 years in before they can retire, that doesn't do them any good. So there's hesitancy there at that real high skilled level area. Looking at the entry-level type positions, they have other options that other companies and other entities are providing them that pays better, and the work is not as arduous. And so the firefighters that we are recruiting, Senator, they as hard and as dirty as that work is, they love it, and they're good at it. They're just not sure if this is the right decision for them. And so we're having to deal with a lot of hesitancy. It affects morale, as you would imagine. And it's just a lot of tenuousness in the organization that we didn't have prior to this. And so it's really critical that we have a permanent solution here so we don't have to deal with that kind of an organization or that side of the organization.
Thank you. Switching back to forest management and forestry, I hear from constituents across Arizona that there are policies and procedures currently in place that are inefficient or restrict industry in reaching the pace and scale desired by the forestry initiative. What barriers do you see that hinder the Forest Service from meeting your goals of the wildfire crisis strategy? And are there policies that we in Congress need to address to make the Forest Service more effective?
Yeah, so we've been addressing those policy issues, Senator. I'll give you an example. When we got Bill and IRA monies, we were going to do a lot of our work through partnerships. And in order to do that work through partnerships, we had to look at the policies and just kind of how it was guiding us. And to give you an example, to be a partner, we had to leverage, our partners had to provide 25% of the project. And if it's a significant cash contribution, up to 50%. And when you look at the dollars we had under Bill and IRA, no partner could do that. And when you look at going outside of our traditional partners and going to non-traditional partners, they had even less of an opportunity. And so I asked the question that, can we get rid of everything that's not in statute in terms of match requirements? Because if you take the tribes as an example, there's indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. We didn't put a value on that, but that's very valuable. And so the rules and the policies as they were didn't allow for some of what we were finding working with our different communities. And so bottom line is that everything that's not in statute has been eliminated from being a partner. And so that has given us the opportunity to bring traditional and non-traditional partners to the table to do a lot of this work and to value their contributions differently than what we have in the past. And those are internal things that we have been making to allow us better opportunities to work with different people in the community.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time's expired, but I have a few more questions for the chief that I'll just submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. They'll be submitted for the record. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Chief. Nice to see you. In Nebraska, nearly 94% of the fire departments are entirely volunteer-run, and the state has experienced an increased number of wildfires over the past couple of years. This has made programs like the Volunteer Fire Assistant Program vital to ensuring fire departments across my rural state are able to prepare and combat wildfires. The Nebraska Forest Service was able to help hundreds of fire districts in my state, 475 in 2022 alone, improve their ability to prepare for and suppress wildfires through this program. And I was very pleased to see Nebraska receive recognition in the FY25 budget on how our rural fire departments were able to utilize the program to purchase wildland firefighting protective equipment. In your budget request for the second year in a row, this program was level funded, along with other important programs like the State Fire Assistant Program. Given the integral role that volunteer firefighters play in combating wildfires in rural communities like we have in Nebraska, can you discuss how that decision was made?
I don't know how that decision was made, Senator, because, we react and respond to the budget that Congress provides us. Now, in terms of how we're working together, we...
But this was in your budget request, that it was level funded.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, if you would, we're trying to have more of a balanced look at things. And so while we could use more, when we balance all of the needs across the spectrum, that's about what we thought was appropriate. Not saying that it was enough, but looking at it from a balanced approach, that's as good as we could do in the request.
Can you outline for me other areas of your budget request that do support our volunteer firefighters' role in combating fire?
Yeah, when you look at all the different agreements that we have across the board, we started with the assumption, and it's more than just an assumption, is that, fires don't respect boundaries, and that it's in all of our best interests to work together so that we can work across boundaries. And so we do work with many volunteer fire departments. In fact, when you have wildfires, even on federal managed lands, a lot of those fire departments come and suppress fires there as well.
Are there specific requests in the budget, though, that would benefit these rural fire departments where they are crossing those boundaries to work with Forest Service? So
Yeah,
I'm talking funding here to be able to help these rural departments.
Yeah, the community wildfire defense grants would be one area where it would be very helpful.
Do you know offhand what the funding level for that program is?
No, but I can certainly provide that to you.
Thank you. That would be great. The vast majority, 88% of the Nebraska forest land is privately owned. And I know that there are partnerships between the Forest Service with our state foresters and local landowners out there, and they're extremely vital to be able to provide for proper management and productivity. The Nebraska Forest Service has been able to reduce wildfire risks across 40,000 acres through that forest stewardship program and plant 650,000 pines by efficient reforestation plans. Can you speak to the benefits of utilizing the forest stewardship program to defuel privately owned forests, especially with wildfires being a large risk in my home state? And with the program being crucial to preventing wildfires on private forest land, can you explain why that program was level funded in the FY25 budget?
Yeah, I'll start with your first question. When I look at how we should be working together on fires, the grassland fires are what we consider to be flashy fuels, and a lot of times they can be wind-driven. And so our firefighters are trained not only to look at forest fires, but also grassland fires, all fires really. Now, in terms of how we work together, I think we have a pretty good track record when you look at all of our wildfire grants and how we are working with many of the fire departments. We generally work through the states to work with the counties and the rural fire departments. So that's where we currently are working together on those types of issues, Senator.
As you're likely aware, we had a big fire in 2022 at Nebraska's National Forest at Halsey, Nebraska. It was severely impacted in 2022. And I've heard concerns from some people in the area about the delay in contracting to remove dead standing trees, specifically the ponderosa pine. For example, because some of the wood stayed out of the forest too long after the fire because of the contracting removal delays, some of the wood is now unusable. And it's also my understanding that because of funding constraints, wood is being piled in decks along forest woods, and currently there isn't any buyer for it. Can you speak to the difficulties with contracting the removal of the dead standing trees and the funding constraints with a stewardship contract?
Sure. So for the timber restoration effort, that contract was awarded back in October of last year. And it was awarded to, I think, Miller Timber Services of Oregon. And so they began to work on, I think it was 850 acres of pine stands, and another 250 acres of cedar stands. And so that work is ongoing, and most of that was from beetle kills and fire kills and that type of material. So there was another contract that was let in August of this past year, and we had 3 proposals on that with the September deadline. So the contractor was selected, and what we're looking at now is what do we do with those decks that we have piled up out there? And so the contractor began work in January of this year. And right now, they're expecting to complete all the cutting and all the decking and the massification on the pieces that they're not going to be decking. That should be completed by the end of May. And so we are currently looking for other options to really remove the deck materials on the other 250 acres of the cedar stands. So the fence contract, which is a part of that, it was selected through a competitive bidding process as well, and that'll begin on April 15th, next week sometime.
Okay, would you be open to having a dialogue on that if we receive more questions from our state on that? Can we reach out to you and be able to get information to those folks?
Yeah, absolutely. In
Great.
fact, this contract that's going to start on April 15th is really for the removal and the reconstruction of approximately about 24 miles of fencing.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Fisher. Senator Tester.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Thank you, Chief Moore, for being here today. You and I have talked extensively over the last year about the Forest Service's decision to find a small electric co-op in Montana for wildfire suppression stemming from a 2021 fire in Montana. And in fact, we just talked about this yesterday. I didn't intend to bring this up, but what I'm hoping for is that if you can't help me on this, that somebody might be watching this video can help me on this, because this is a serious situation. The Forest Service fined a small electric cooperative in the state of Montana a little over $5 million for a fire in 2021. To put this in perspective, the annual operating revenue for this small cooperative is $15 million. If this isn't crazy enough, I recently learned that this is not a process, there is not a process in place for the cooperative to be able to appeal this case directly to the Forest Service, which in my opinion, and I don't think this is false, this is absolute fact, would be the agency that's most readily equipped to hear an appeal on a forest fire in Forest Service land that knows about things like dead trees and 10-foot right-of-ways on each side of the pole and those kind of things. Instead, the only recourse for this small cooperative may be to enter into a settlement, and I say may because hopefully we can find a different way to have some assurance for this small cooperative, but may be to enter into a settlement process with lawyers at the Department of Justice. Now, while I appreciate the importance of holding folks accountable, and I believe in it strongly, on taking preventative measures to avoid costly wildfires, I can tell you the jury is still out on whether the cooperative was negligent at all. And put that together, this process seems extremely broken. So let's put this in perspective for some issues that we deal about in Congress. Let's say the federal government had the authority to fine a social media company 1/3 of their operating revenue, or an airline. What do you guys think would be the process there? It would be chaos with no appeal rights. Now, I understand that there are some statutes that the agency needs to follow, but there are some questions. And Chief Moore, you know very well, at least you should, and I think you do, know very well that finding a cooperative with a $15 million budget, 1/3 of its revenue, a cooperative that's been around, by the way, for 87 years, would have two outcomes. The cooperative either goes out of business and folks lose electricity, which is pretty darn critical in the 21st century, or the cooperative has to jack up energy costs on its entire members, because cooperatives are owned by the customer, to cover the bill. Given that the blame for the 2021 fire is disputable, my question to you, Chief Moore, is how the hell did we end up here?
Well, first of all, Senator, you accurately described the process. And anything over $100,000 moves into DOJ for settlement or resolution. How we got there, I think that you know, it's the same in many parts of the country, and especially out in the western part of the country, where you have overstocked forests. And the fact that climate change has exacerbated the conditions out on the ground, we have similar conditions in many parts of the country. So this is not unusual. And we've tried to work with the utility, not tried, but we've actually worked with the utility sector by removing a lot of the redundancies of requiring them to come in every year to get so-called permission to do clearance around their power lines. So I don't know all the specifics directly with that, but I know that where we are right now, we haven't done anything different with them is what we would normally do when there is a fire. And we look at the cause. And after the investigation, you know, it was determined that a tree had fallen on their power line, which arced and started the fire.
So can I ask you, how often does this kind of a fee be put on cooperatives or investor-owned utilities? This kind of a fine?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's always different. I mean, you know, a large public utility is going to be different than a small co-op utility. PG&E in California is one. They've been litigated as well on fires that have started under their power lines. And so this is not an unusual process.
I would just say this. You know how big the trees are in the forest. Yeah. You know that a 10-foot right-of-way on each side of the pole is required. And I believe we tried to adjust that right-of-way a few times and have been unsuccessful in being able to do that. Yeah. I would just tell you that I think we put this cooperative in a position where if we continue down this road, we're doomed. And I will say, you know, we had the conversation yesterday, and you had mentioned to me that maybe I should call up the Department of Justice. I have found one thing in my 17 and a half years in this job: when I start telling lawyers what to do, it usually ends up with a bad outcome. And that's a fact. That's not a joke at all. Yeah. Because the truth of the matter is that something about it, they take incredible offense to it. And I would just say this: if we cannot find some way in this equation to add common sense to what's going on here, because this doesn't make any sense. In fact, when they first told me that this had happened, I looked them in a square eye and said, "You're not telling me the truth. You're kidding me. No, it's the truth." And it was the truth. But if we don't figure out a way to do this, and if we need a legislative fix, I got a notion we can do it in a bipartisan way. But putting a small company, a small cooperative, or a company, it doesn't matter, out of business because we got a forest that's half dead or more, because we got a right-of-way that's inadequate, because they didn't do anything wrong, and there's lots of things we do in this world that are wrong, but this outfit didn't do anything wrong, and they get slapped with a $5 million. They're done. They're done. 87 years of service by this company is done. And so we need to figure out a solution here. And it can't be dependent on some attorney at the Department of Justice that doesn't know what the hell's going on in rural America to make a decision. I'm just going to tell you, I don't like the looks of that outcome. That's me as a farmer talking, okay? And as a senator.
Yeah. Now, I don't disagree with you, Senator. This is something that needs to be addressed. I have, by statute, I just have no authority in any of this. But I agree, it's a concern. And there's a lot of conditions like that all across the West that are being put in a similar situation.
Hindsight is 20/20, but I would love to meet the person who levied this fine in the Forest Service. I would love to meet that person, because common sense was slim or none, and slim left town.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Senator Hovind.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Tester, that's the kind of thing I'd be happy to work with you on if a legislative solution is needed, because we need common sense. And listening to you, I understand you'd be pleased to meet the person that levied the fine. I'm guessing it wouldn't be so. He might not share the same enthusiasm. But, yeah, right on. We need common sense in these solutions. Chief, thanks for being here today. Good to see you again. When you come into North Dakota?
Well, I'll certainly work on that with you. I know I couldn't go the last time. Chris French went with me, but I would love to accompany you there.
Yeah, well, we worked on it before, and so I'd like to extend the invitation again, and we'd love to have you come out
Great.
and see us. So
forward to
we can work on that.
Yes.
And I must tell you and commend you, Deputy Chief Chris French came out last year in your stead, and I don't know, he set a pretty high bar. I'm thinking maybe that's why you're avoiding us, because he came out, we took him out west, and he helped us with the spraying on these noxious weeds. We got about 1.7 million out of a commitment of 4.5, which we really appreciate. And that's what I mean. He came out and was good. And I want to compliment him and also want to ask for your commitment that we follow up and we get the full 4.5 for those noxious weeds. Do we have your commitment?
Yeah, in fact, I believe he may have committed to doing that as soon as we got a budget. So we just got a budget, so we're committed to providing that. And of course, that will be provided over multiple years.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And would you recommend to him that he come back out? I mean, if he's going to do that well, we might find something else for him to help us
Yeah,
work
if he's
on.
going to
off
do
the
that
good.
well, maybe he can just take my place.
Well, that's what I'm
But I would love
saying.
to
You
go
don't want him
back.
outshining you, so you'll have to come out. But we do appreciate it. We'd like him come back too. So if you encourage him, that would be great. I also want to follow up. We've had this conversation before, but would you please express for your record that you are committed to multiple uses of the land?
I am, yes.
Okay. And do you believe that timber harvesting and those kind of things can actually benefit fire risk management?
It can and does.
Okay. And how do you proactively engage in that process?
In timber management?
Yeah. How do you make sure that folks out on the ground are able to accomplish that, not held up?
Well, I mean, first of all, they need to have a budget in order to do
It
that.
kind of goes back to what Senator Tester was just talking about, the ability for folks on the ground to be able to take common sense action and not, face sanctions for it for some reason.
Right.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, I think you've just said it. It starts with the budget, and I think that as we get our budget in the different program areas, then we provide those types of activities on the forest.
Along those lines, in the Great American Outdoors Act, we secured funding that actually helps in the grasslands as well, get water out there to livestock and that kind of thing. And there's a number of things that are involved. In some cases, it's, digging wells. In some cases, it's developing stock ponds. In other cases, it's just actually moving the water across the grasslands. And they have to get permits to do that. Yeah. So we've got this program between the Great American Outdoor Act and our state, where we help the grazers get access to water. But one of the challenges they hit is permitting, and that's y'all. Can you help us there? Or do you have some ideas on how we can help with the permitting process? Because it's, they go through a lot of work to do it. It's very burdensome, costly, and takes a lot of time.
So I don't know the specifics that you may be referring to, Senator, but I'd be more than happy to look into any specific permitting issues or concerns that you may have.
Yeah, that would be great. That'd be a great reason to have you out there, because it involves a lot of things. In some cases, it's the Historical Society. There's just a lot of steps they have to go through. And to get you out there with some of our cowboys and let them kind of show you and talk to you. Yeah. I think back to that common sense aspect, I think you applying some common sense would find ways to improve it, streamline it. And then the last thing I'll bring up is I have Senator Bennett of Colorado and I have legislation we call the Joint Chiefs Program, which I think you're familiar with. Would you, talk a little bit about how you think that program can help with things like improve fire resilience, soil health, water quality, those kind of things? Yeah,
so that's within USDA. The Joint Chiefs Project, as an example, is myself and my counterpart with NRCS, Chief Cosby. We've been looking at a number of those Joint Chief projects across the country, and I think that they're very, very valuable, particularly when you look at private lands versus federal lands and how we can come together to address some of those critical issues on private lands. But also, particularly if if what's happening on the highlands, usually the federal lands, is it causing impacts on the private land down beneath? And in many cases, the Joint Chiefs projects has been a godsend in many ways to address a lot of those issues.
Good. Thanks for being here, and thanks for the help that we have been able to receive from you and your staff, and again, look forward to have you
Thank you, Senator.
come to our state as well. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Senator Hoeven. Now we'll turn to Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to working with you and Ranking Member Merkowski as we kick off this new appropriation season. Chief, welcome. It's good to see you. And I was pleased to see in the budget request you submitted a grant for Still Meadow Peace Park for the Still Meadow Community Fellowship Environmental Education Program. Still Meadow Peace Park is in West Baltimore, and it's been a place of innovative partnership with the Forest Service's Baltimore Urban Field Office. The community has worked to plant over 2,500 trees as it works to restore the woods, and the Urban Field Office has been able to use the land as a laboratory to understand urban green spaces. A partnership with the local workforce training nonprofit Turnaround Tuesdays graduated a class of new foresters just last summer. Can you speak to how the Forest Service can use this kind of innovative collaboration to maximize the benefits of renewing the urban tree canopy?
Yeah, so as you know, between the IRA funding, we had about $1.5 billion to invest in these types of projects and similar projects. And we've been all across the country. Now what's exciting about this is that $1.5 billion is a lot of money, but we actually had 7 times the requests for those dollars, which says that there's a huge need in many of our urban areas for these types of dollars. This particular project that you mentioned was awarded $2 million, and many projects across our urban areas have been awarded these types of projects. And so I think when you look at, and our science is telling us this, when you look at a tree canopy neighborhood versus one that does not have trees, there's about a 17 to 18% difference in the temperature. And so when you look at the value of this type of work in these type of settings, it's very valuable, and is particularly in many of our disadvantaged communities.
Well, thank you, Chief, and I'd just like to ask unanimous consent to put in the record an article entitled "Still Meadow Peace Park is Baltimore's Latest Tale of Urban Reinvention."
Without objection.
Thank you. I do think it's a great model and example of what we can be doing. So I want to turn now to a little wider lens, which is the Chesapeake Bay. And the Chesapeake Bay program released a report last fall tracking an overall loss of tree canopy in the Chesapeake Bay watershed as development and impermeable surfaces like driveways and parking lots have increased. The Forest Service has been a partner in the Chesapeake Forest Restoration Strategy, largely providing technical assistance to the states as they work to increase the tree canopy and riparian buffers. Could you just speak to the importance of trees and forests to the overall Chesapeake Bay restoration effort?
Sure. So as you know, riparian buffers, you know, they act as filters as one of the uses of it. And it also removes a lot of air pollution from the area. It also reduces storm runoff. It also looks at the carbon sequestration. And when you look at stormwater runoff, it's our team looked at the value of the work that's in the Chesapeake Bay, and what it came up with, that trees are providing over $6 billion of benefits annually from air pollution, removal of stormwater runoff, and carbon sequestration in the Chesapeake Bay. And so I think what it tells you is that trees provides a really good buffer to filter out some of the things that's having negative impacts on the Bay, as well as many other areas.
Thank you. And, you know, my colleagues on this committee have heard and will continue to hear me talk a lot about the importance of protecting the Chesapeake Bay. It's a national and natural treasure, international treasure, and it also supports the livelihood of tens of thousands, if not millions, of people in the entire watershed, from the watermen and others who get their living from the bounty of the bay, to the tourism industry, to the boating industry. So a healthy bay is not only important for ecological and preservation reasons, it's essential to our economy, and we need all pieces of this strategy to work, including the Forest Service. And I'm going to continue to reach out to you to see if there are additional ways we can engage the Forest Service as part of our overall strategy to protect the bay. I think I'm right in saying that if you look at the land mass area to the water body size, it is the largest sort of ratio of land mass draining into a water body than any other water body in the country, from parts of New York all down the mid-Atlantic coast to Virginia, including the District of Columbia. So when I talk about more driveways and impermeable surfaces, we're talking about a large land area where this is happening. And so just to try to keep ahead of the game, I mean, we've got to be taking these measures, and to actually get the bay clean up to where we want it, we're going to have to accelerate these efforts. So this is one piece, an important piece of that overall strategy. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Van Hollen. And I'm going to have to compare the Columbia River drainage, the Chesapeake drainage. Thank you. Chief Moore, the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest covers 2,700 square miles, some 7 counties and 2 states, because some of it extends into to California. The Wildfire Crisis Strategy has identified the Rogue Basin as a high-risk fire shed. And your team and my team, and BLM, are looking at investments in the landscape. With its identification as a high-risk fire shed, can we make sure that it gets attention in terms of the funding for high-risk fire sheds?
Yes, Senator, it is considered a high-risk fire shed.
And can we make sure that it gets funding associated with being a high-risk fire shed?
Can I take a look to see where we are with funding, Senator, and get back with you on that? But this would be an important area for us, as it is with you.
Thank you. And despite the size of it, the 2,100 square miles, a big section in the middle, not included in that 2,100 square miles, is BLM land. If we include that, it's an even larger, and so we need cooperation between your team and the BLM team.
Yes.
Also, the Forest Service has a management plan direction for old growth across the National Forest System. In Oregon, we pretty much took out most of our old growth. I've been in many, many parts of the state where I look at some really big trees, 2 to 3 feet across and very, very tall, and then I'll see the 6 to 8 foot across stumps from the original harvest and realize that they're still kind of young. But we have that limited amount of old growth we have left is still critical habitat for a variety of species. And it's why the harvesting has really gone to second growth and protecting what remaining old growth there is, not to mention that they're much more fire resistant to the fires that sweep through. Any insights on how the management plan direction for old growth is changing our perspectives or habits of the Forest Service harvesting?
So let's take a look at the wildfire crisis strategy, which I think this old growth amendment is going to be complementary to that, because one of the biggest threats to old growth is, that's been identified is wildfires. Disease and insects is another one of the biggest threats. And in order to manage old growth, then we have to go in and we will have timber sales. I mean, it's legitimate. In this old growth amendment. And so you'll see a management within these old growth areas simply because they're being threatened by fire, disease, and insects.
Well, I do want to take a look at that. I want to make sure that what little of the true old growth we have left is not part of a harvest plan. Our mills have retooled for smaller trees. Our forest products have retooled for smaller trees. And so those, the few sections of old growth we have left shouldn't be in a harvesting plan.
Yeah, and it's not the same everywhere, Senator. I mean, there's geographic differences all across the country, and that's why it's really difficult to have, you know, just a standard that's going to apply across the country, because it simply won't. There are some areas where you have larger stands of old growth where you will be managing within those. There are some areas where you have a smaller growth where you may not be doing much management.
Do you have timing on when the land management plan directions for old growth will be available?
So the plan right now for the amendment is to have a draft sometime in June or so, and to look at a final record of decision sometime toward the end of the year. That's the plan as of now.
Okay. If your team could keep my team briefed on that, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Last year, we released an action plan to advance nation-to-nation relationships with tribal governments. We also worked with you to rename the state and private forestry account to include state, tribal, and private forestry, to acknowledge that tribes are a critical partner. What are you and your staff doing to engage with the tribes to ensure they have a role in agency decision-making?
So we started, and you just mentioned it yourself, Senator, we did a name change within the agency. It used to be state and private forestry, now state, private, and tribal forestry. Tribal was always in there, but it was silent because it wasn't named. We changed that this year. We've also developed a tribal action plan to really get at that, and we're requiring our employees to become familiar with tribal issues, as well as some of the treaties that we have had through the years. And I think education is the first place to start about how those treaties have been honored or not honored in many cases. And so we wanted to make an attempt to educate our workforce first about tribal action plans and the treaty rights and all of those things as relates to tribes. So we are in the middle of that now. We're having a lot of dividends. I know myself and the Undersecretary has gone out and visited many of the tribes and spent a week out there just riding and getting familiar with their perspective, their sides of the issues. And looking at the Northwest Forest Plan, you know, we have 5 tribes that's going to be a part of the Federal Advisory Committee on that. So we've been making a lot of efforts to reach more into the tribal communities. We've also learned, too, and this whole process this past year, I don't know if you've ever heard the term of 2 eyes seeing, but typically the Forest Service and others have looked at Western science as a way and as a foundation for us. And while that has provided a lot of valuable knowledge and insight, the indigenous traditional ecological knowledge is also providing a lot of insights into how we should be managing the ecosystems. And so they refer to that as 2 eyes seeing. Rather than looking out of one eye of the Western science, use both eyes to also include the indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. And so we are learning how to be more inclusive. And our intent is to continue to find ways to engage with our tribal partners.
One specific opportunity that you and I have talked about previously is related to the Klamath tribes. Yeah, their reservation was turned into the Fremont-Winoma National Forest when they were terminated, so they have a deep connection to these lands. And they have been working to establish a co-stewardship and management agreement with the National Forest Service. Any update on the progress in establishing that partnership?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're right in the middle of establishing the partnerships. The other things that we are doing with that partnership, and in addition to that partnership, is applying prescribed fire and restoring habitat for fisheries that are culturally significant for the Klamath tribe. We're also, in addition to that, working to stand up a Klamath tribes owned and operated equipment and fire crews, which is really increasing firefighting capacity for the entire basin that you talked about. So we are moving to help establish that whole fire mechanism within the tribes, but also working to restore those things that are very important for the Klamath tribe.
Thank you. I want to turn to Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of keeping with the focus on our tribes, as you know well, under the Farm Bill in 2018, the Forest Service was provided 638 authority to enter into agreements with tribal governments to conduct various projects on Forest Service lands. Our challenge in Alaska is that the 638 authority is limited both as to the scope of activity and to the area in which the activity occurs. It has to be on forest lands that are contiguous with tribal trust lands. So our challenge in Alaska is that we don't have much in the way of trust lands, and instead, we've got the model under ANCSA that includes Alaska Native corporations that hold and manage the lands for the benefits. So we're looking at this and suggesting that we need to expand this 638 authority for the Tribal Forest Protection Act projects so that we can add on additional activities across forest lands, whether it's contiguous or adjacent to the tribal trust lands. So we look at this as a real opportunity for partnering, and partnering particularly in areas where you have exactly what you have just acknowledged, the indigenous traditional cultural knowledge. It's there on the ground. Let's utilize our indigenous peoples and all that they bring to the table, and we think that 638 authority can help us do just that. There's a little bit of resistance within USDA and the Forest Service. And so what I'm asking for from you today, Chief, is your commitment to work with me and my staff as we look to expand this 638 authority in Alaska and also for opportunities outside of the Tribal Forest Protection Act.
Yes, Senator, I would enjoy working with you on this issue.
And I know that there are others in my capacity as the ranking member on the Indian Affairs Committee. I've had conversations with others about this who, again, think that there are real opportunities there. We have an example in Alaska already where the Forest Service and Tlingit Haida have signed this memorandum of understanding in October last year. I think it's a good first step, this collaboration or commitment to collaborating on resource management and the planning there at Mendenhall Glacier. I think that that's a positive, but I hope that the Forest Service doesn't stop there and considers 638 compacting on this. I think it's a great opportunity. Southeast Alaska Sustainable Strategy. This is something where, again, you and I have had conversation. USDA's initial commitment, and I underscore initial commitment, was $25 million to focus on the local priorities for the short-term investment there. We've seen good awards coming for those projects. That's great. I'm hearing good things from folks in Southeast about that. But there's a recognition that well, $25 million is not something to walk away from. It is significant, but we also recognize that this was a commitment that was made by the federal government when you basically shut the door on any real timber opportunities coming out of the Tongass and as a consequence of the decision on the roadless rule. So we've got a lot of folks that are looking at the long-term economic health in the region and asking me, well, what does it mean as a follow-on? And this is a conversation that I've had with Secretary Vilsack. It was not a very satisfying conversation. I think I've shared with you, but it was made clear, not just to me, but to the people of the Tongass, that $25 million was going to be an initial investment. So I will ask you the question this morning about what we can expect in terms of additional investments and their focus towards long-term economic sustainability.
Okay, so the data that I have is that in addition to that $25 million, that it's been leveraged by tens of millions of bill and IRA dollars. So let me look into this, Senator, and get back with you to see if there's a disconnect, and if so, where. But my information, my data is telling me that we have leveraged that through bill and IRA dollars.
Well, I would appreciate it if you would look to that and confirm, because when the commitment was made for the Southeast Sustainable Strategy and that initial $25 million, we had not yet dreamed of IJA. And I know that for a fact because I was one of the architects of that. And so there was a commitment made. You're correct. We have seen some pretty extraordinary resources come into the region because of IJA and the IRA. I grant you that. But I also know that that is additive. It does not reference the initial agreement that we had with the Southeast Sustainable Strategy. So I look forward to your follow-on. Let me continue on Alaska-specific issues. I know that you're familiar with my legislation that we are working through the process to address the landless Native Alaskans in Southeast Alaska. I appreciate that Forest Service understanding on this issue has evolved. I think that that has been very important to us as we've moved through the process. I think Forest Service has gone from a position of opposition to realizing that what we are attempting to do is to make good on the commitment to these 5 communities, and are working cooperatively with us on that.
Yeah, so we're committed to working with you on this, Senator. This is something that needs to be addressed, and we agree with you on this. So
Good.
We're committed to working with you.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that. And another area where, again, we need to recognize but an injustice that many of our Alaska Native veterans who were serving in Vietnam at the time that they were allowed to select their land entitlements. They were not able to do so because of their service, and they were left out. So we're trying to make good on the commitment to the remaining. There's not that many of them that are left. One of the challenges that we have is that and we're very proud of the fact that we had so many Alaska Natives serving who were from the southeastern region. But the challenge that we have is that the legislation that we were able to pass to allow for opening up for additional selection excluded any selections in the Tongass. So I hear from veterans all the time that it's like giving me a promise for a bus that will never come. I get a ticket, but this bus will never even be in my community, in my region. I will never be able to access it. So we're trying to be helpful and creative. We're working through legislation that would open up areas in refuge land. I am moving legislation that would open up areas in Forest Service. I just had a meeting with Alaska BLM last week in Anchorage, and I'm told that we've got about 500 veterans in Southeast who have not filed any application because they feel it would be meaningless to have to select in an area that is 1,200 miles from their home with no connection to that. And so I'm encouraging those veterans to apply, even knowing that the Tongass is not available right now. But I am hoping that Forest Service is looking at this issue and is considering helping us address this 50-year inequity to our Vietnam veterans. And we've got more work to do on this. I understand that, but I would hope that Forest Service would be helping us as we try to seek areas for these veterans.
Senator, we do want to do the right thing, and so we're interested in working with you to see if there's some kind of a solution to this.
Good, thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Murkowski. And I want to turn to an issue related to the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. A new standard was rolled out by the EPA in which they're looking at the small particles that do the most damage to lungs, and they reduced basically by 25% the objective. That is lowering the particulate matter 2.5 standard from 12 micrograms per meter cubed to 9. And if you don't meet that standard, then an area has to, they're labeled a non-attainment standard. They have to produce a plan on how they're going to achieve it. There's been a lot of questions raised about the impacts of this. And one of those questions is how it might affect prescribed burns. Senator Daines and I raised this question to the EPA, and they responded and said, essentially, there is a pathway called Exceptional Events Program. I want to see if you understand this to mean that prescribed burns will be exempted from essentially triggering non-attainment, or whether that still is a little uncertain.
Well, Senator, for me, it's still a little uncertain, but I think it's something that we have to have some really honest discussions around, because it's an either or. We can either look at using prescribed fires, or we can deal with the aftermaths of wildfires. And there's a difference in the smoke, even though it's smoke from a fire. We have to really have an honest discussion about weighing the risk for either one and taking the least damaging option, because in this case, if we do not make a decision on this, we're going to continue to experience what we're experiencing on our landscapes. So this is something that we really need to have some discussions around. I understand, the clean air attainment and what we're after, but we're at a point, I think, in this country where we got to have some really hard discussions, even if it's temporary relief on some of the requirements.
All right, so I am disturbed by your answer. There was a November MOU between the EPA and a whole bunch of other groups. I think it's really important to nail this down, because if we don't get clarity on prescribed burns not triggering non-attainment, it will be a reason many communities will say, absolutely, don't do that 2-day prescribed burn, because it's going to affect everything in our local economy, because we'll be labeled non-attainment. So this is something that has to be figured out. The communities in Oregon that used to really resist prescribed burns because they didn't want those couple days of potential smoke now are asking at my town halls about making sure that we reduce the risk of a fire sweeping through their town after witnessing our 2020 Labor Day fires. I mean, people across the nation think of Paradise, California, but our 2020 fires, I traveled from the northern border of our state to California and back, never got out of the smoke. 6 towns wiped out, another 6 partially wiped out. It was extraordinary. People understand the risk with the changing longer, hotter, drier summers. But this is a potential obstacle to using a significant tool to reduce risks. So can I get your commitment to work on this to try to get clarity that prescribed fires the particulates that come from prescribed fires will not be utilized in triggering non-attainment?
Yeah, perhaps I wasn't really clear at my response, but I'm actually agreeing with you, Senator, that we need to be looking at prescribed fire in a much larger way than what we currently are. If that's got to be part of the solution to this wildfire situation that we have going.
And that will include working to make sure that smoke from prescribed fires does not trigger or count towards non-attainment?
I don't know where we are. I have no control over that, but I do think that's the discussion I think we have to have. because I'm in support of prescribed burning. In fact, I'm in support of more prescribed burning than what we're currently doing. We're organizing to do more prescribed burning, and so that's I think that's our position on the issue.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping you would say, yes, I will work to make sure that prescribed fire smoke does not count towards non-attainment. I think you're kind of saying that, but I'm not hearing it that clearly.
I'm kind of saying that, but I don't know the unknown.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to get from a less clear statement to a clearer action because this is really important piece of the puzzle that there's a lot of concern over.
Yes.
Did you have any last question?
Just very quickly, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief, for giving us so much time here this morning. I mentioned in my comments that Alaska is no stranger to wildfire. Most of our fires are typically up north, out on the tundra, but we're seeing wildfires in different places, in areas that have typically been viewed as almost wetlands, in areas that have a great deal of permafrost. The question for you this morning is, as we're seeing fires in areas that typically didn't burn, we're seeing some concerns, particularly when you have a burned area and then exposure to areas that have been basically frozen through the permafrost, and now you've got releases to the concerns that the chairman has when that area is now kind of opened up. You have releases of carbon into the atmosphere that are notable. I'm wondering if the Forest Service has done any research into increased fires in areas with permafrost.
No, we haven't, to my knowledge, but that's a very interesting aspect. I'll talk with our scientists.
Okay. The other thing I'd like you to explore with them is whether or not there's been any research with regards to impacts on watershed quality. As you probably know, we are experiencing some salmon declines, catastrophic impacts to salmon. And I'm wondering if there's any relationship between the catastrophic fires that we see and the dwindling populations that we're seeing on the Kuskokwim and on the Yukon. So I don't know if you can ask your research folks if there's been any consideration given to that?
I would certainly do that. I know typically you would have some impacts because of the sedimentation that's going to be draining into the rivers, which would have a negative impact on the
Which all makes sense. We've always had fires, though, and so what we're trying to understand is this has been an unprecedented decline in our fisheries. Something else is going on.
Okay.
Is it because we're having fires in parts of the state that we haven't seen before? So if there's no research out there, I get it, but if there is something, we would certainly be interested in that. And then my last question to you this morning is, I know you were up in the Chugach, and I hope you had an opportunity to discuss with the region the demand for increased access to the recreational areas. I think we've made some good progress on special use permits over the years, and so know that we continue to hear from the outfitters and the guides and the other providers. They want to share these areas with so many other people. So I'm hoping that you heard firsthand that increased demand is there. We want to do it right. We get all that, but hopefully you can work with us on accessing these recreation areas.
I will, and I did hear about that when I was there on my visit.
Good, good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Chief Moore, thank you for addressing these many issues. And do you have a little bit of follow-up?
Well, just if you don't mind, Senator, just a clarification, because I'm not sure if it came across, but the old growth amendment process, I had had shared with you that it's we're gonna have a draft in June or July, but maybe what wasn't clear is that the draft will be completed in early 2025, but between the draft and the final, we'll have another public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. The record for the hearing will remain open until the close of business on April 17th. So if members have any additional questions they would like to submit, homework for the Chief Moore's team or articles, that is the deadline. And so with that, this hearing is adjourned.